Your birthday is coming up, and instead of excitement, you feel something quieter. Not dread, not sadness exactly, just nothing. Or maybe something worse, a kind of low-grade heaviness you can't explain and don't want to name. People ask what you want to do. You say nothing. They say, "Come on, it's your birthday." You smile. You change the subject. And the day passes the way it always does, like any other Tuesday. If this sounds like you, you're not broken, you're not ungrateful, and you're definitely not cold. There's a reason the one day meant to celebrate you is the one day you'd rather disappear. And that reason is deeper than most people will ever understand. Because avoiding your birthday isn't just a preference. It's not introversion, it's not modesty, and it's not just how you are. Psychology research links birthday avoidance to some of the most fundamental patterns in human development: how you learned to be seen, whether you learned that your needs mattered, and what happened the first time you let yourself expect something good and it didn't come. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, believed that the need for positive regard isn't optional, it's as essential as food. When that need goes unmet, especially early, the body learns something it never forgets. And over time, a dangerous question forms. Not, "Do I deserve to be celebrated?" That question is too loud, too easy to dismiss. The real question is quieter. It sounds like, "What's the point?" And beneath that, "Would anyone even notice if I didn't show up?" That question doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from a place that learned over and over that needing attention led to disappointment, so it stopped needing. But here's what most people miss. Avoiding your birthday isn't one thing. It's not a single trait. It's 5 distinct psychological patterns, and which one is driving you changes everything about how you understand yourself. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one is yours, and why it's not something to fix, but something to finally understand. Most people assume that if you don't celebrate your birthday, you're either shy, humble, or secretly depressed. But psychology tells a more complicated story. Some people don't celebrate because they never learned how to receive. Others because they learned that visibility was dangerous. Some because a birthday is a mirror they don't want to look into. It shows them a version of themselves they're not sure they recognize anymore. And some don't celebrate because the people who should have shown up didn't. Not because they were cruel, but because they were absent, and that absence left a shape that no amount of cake or candles ever seems to fill. The first pattern is the oldest one. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind. There's a certain kind of childhood where birthdays weren't forgotten, they were hollow. The cake was there, the people were there, but something was missing. Not the ritual, but the feeling behind it. You learned to blow out candles without making a wish, because wishes require belief that something good might come, and somewhere along the way, that belief went quiet. John Bowlby's attachment theory explains this better than anyone talks about. When a child's emotional needs are consistently met with distraction, impatience, or silence, even in a house that looks fine from the outside, the nervous system adapts, not by wanting more, by wanting less. This is the part most people misunderstand. You didn't stop celebrating because you stopped caring. You stopped celebrating because caring hurt. Not because it wanted to, but because every time it reached out, the response taught it to reach less. Over time, that pattern becomes automatic. The hand stops reaching before the mind even registers the desire. And this is where something else happens. The absence of celebration doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels normal. And that normalization, that's the quietest form of emotional conditioning there is. Some people don't avoid their birthday because nothing happened. They avoid it because too much of the wrong thing happened. Being seen, really seen, with all eyes on you, doesn't feel like warmth. It feels like exposure, like standing in a room with no walls. Every happy birthday lands not as a gift, but as a spotlight you didn't ask for. Alfred Adler called this the inferiority complex, but that name doesn't capture it fully. It's not that you feel less than others, it's that you feel like attention reveals something you've spent your whole life trying to hide, that you're not as put together as you appear, that beneath the composure, you're still figuring it out. So when the room turns to face you, your nervous system doesn't say, enjoy this, it says, perform, now, don't let them see the cracks. Not because you're fake, not because you're fragile, just because visibility was never safe. It was always an audition. You know that feeling when you let yourself want something, just a little, and it doesn't come? Not because anyone was cruel, but because life just didn't deliver. The person who said they'd be there wasn't. The call that was supposed to come didn't. The evening you quietly hoped would feel special felt like every other evening instead. After enough of those moments, something shifts. The brain doesn't just lower its expectations, it builds a protective wall around the entire category of days that's supposed to matter. Because the gap between what should happen and what does happen is where the pain lives, and the wider that gap, the deeper the cut. Sigmund Freud called this the reality principle, the moment the psyche learns that wanting something doesn't make it appear. But for some people, that lesson didn't arrive gently. It arrived on a birthday, more than once. Now, here's what nobody tells you. All three of those patterns, the conditioning, the fear, the disappointment, they share something. They all assume that not celebrating your birthday is a problem to solve. That the goal is to eventually learn to celebrate, to get over it, to let people in. But what if that's not the full picture? Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and built logotherapy from the wreckage, believed that meaning isn't found in what happens to you. It's found in how you respond to what happens. And sometimes choosing not to celebrate isn't avoidance. It's a quiet act of self-definition. Stay with me, because the next two reasons change how you see this entirely. Birthdays are checkpoints, and not everyone wants to stop at a checkpoint. Because when the clock hits midnight and the number changes, 27, 28, 29, it doesn't just mark time, it measures. Against what? Against the version of yourself you thought you'd be. Against the plans you made at 20 that now feel like they belonged to someone else. Carl Jung called this the tension between the persona, the self you show the world, and the shadow, the self you keep hidden, even from yourself. A birthday forces those two selves into the same room, and that meeting is not always peaceful. Some people don't celebrate because the gap between who they are and who they thought they'd be is a room they don't want to sit in alone. Not because they've failed, but because the distance is disorienting, and a party doesn't fix disorientation, it just makes it louder. And then there are the people who don't celebrate, not because they can't, but because they simply don't need to. This is the pattern that surprises everyone, including the people who live it. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs places esteem and belonging near the top, but self-actualized people, the ones at the peak, meet those needs internally. They don't require a day on the calendar to know they matter. They don't need a room full of people singing to confirm their existence. For these people, skipping their birthday isn't a wound. It's a quiet declaration. I am already whole. Not because they don't love the people who'd celebrate them, but because their sense of self doesn't depend on external ritual. There's a difference between not celebrating because you can't bear to, and not celebrating because you no longer need to. The first is survival. The second is freedom. And most people who don't celebrate their birthday are somewhere on the bridge between the two. So what ties all five of these together? Whether your reason is conditioning or fear or disappointment or reflection or quiet self-sufficiency, beneath all of it is the same question. A question that most people who don't celebrate their birthday have never said out loud. Would I still matter if nobody noticed? That question isn't weakness. It's the deepest form of self-awareness there is, because it means you've looked at the space between being celebrated and being loved, and you know they're not the same thing.
Being celebrated is external. It depends on who shows up, what they say, how the day looks. Being loved, being seen, that's internal. That exists whether or not there's a cake, whether or not the phone rings, whether or not the day passes like any other Tuesday. People who don't celebrate their birthday have often learned the difference earlier than most, not because they chose to, but because they had to.
And maybe that's the real answer. Not why don't you celebrate, but what would it take for you to feel celebrated without needing proof? You don't have to answer that today, but it's worth sitting with. If this felt familiar, if you're someone who lets their birthday pass in silence, drop one word in the comments that describes how your birthday feels to you. I read every one. And if this resonated, subscribe. We explore the layers of human psychology that most people never talk about.